I'm Connor Wold and welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Oscar Films. This week we're going to be looking at the 1964 class of films, a class that has some really all-time great classics, but then the movie we're covering today I think is definitely a forgotten one. So if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is I look at a film that was nominated for Best Picture starting with the year 1988, and we've been working backwards now, of course, with movies released in the year 1964, and I pick a movie that I feel that has been forgotten, one that's sort of been lost to time. You know, this was a sort of a top 5 movie of that year according to the Oscars, according to the Academy, yet for some reason or another it hasn't been as well acclaimed or well remembered as some of its other nominees or some of the other movies released in that year. And especially nowadays, as we see sort of the Oscars separate a lot from popular culture, it's interesting to look back, and in some ways they're very much in line, but in a lot of ways sometimes the movies they do pick, just for one reason or another, have never really stayed in the relevant popular culture, at least in film-going culture. So I like to talk about sort of the Oscar history and talk about the other 5 nominees. I also like to look at sort of my thoughts on the film and try to answer that central question as to why it hasn't been remembered. So starting with the 5 nominees, the first nominee and the eventual Best Picture winner is going to be My First Lady. Like I've been talking about in more of the recent episodes as we go into the 60s, especially in 64, this is kind of the start of it. I know last episode I said Hard Day's Night was released in 67. I was wrong. It was released in 64. This is also the same year that the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. So very much a British invasion into American culture, and a lot of these sort of movies and of course the music very influenced in terms of North American culture. So the Academy being largely American, it sort of was really responding to this sort of British and these British films that were coming out during this time. But they were also really fond of musicals, so it makes no sense. It makes sense that you know, My Fair Lady, being a British musical, of course, gets that win. And as a matter of fact, it was pretty dominant in its win, getting a total of 8 Oscar wins, which is one of the higher totals for a Best Picture winner. However, notably, Audrey Hepburn, the star of My Fair Lady, was not nominated. Now I think that's kind of strange and weird, because she's the star of the movie. She is so well beloved, a British sort of icon in a lot of ways too, especially for the movies. However, she is a bit of a controversial choice for this movie, because this was based on a play that was on Broadway, who starred Julie Andrews, the star of Mary Poppins, who ended up winning Best Lead Actress for Mary Poppins this year. So she was actually the original originator of this character on Broadway, but she wasn't brought over into the film version, which upset some people. Also, Audrey Hepburn, despite actually trying to sing and singing on set, her vocals were eventually replaced by someone else. I'm unsure of, unfortunately, but she didn't actually sing in the movie, so some points I think were taken off from that. But despite that, I think the Academy overall still really loved the movie, and this is a movie that I think has stayed in relevance, because especially within musical sort of circles, because it's acclaimed Broadway show, so you have the fans of that, but then also sort of the movie version, which is quite delightful as well. Another nominee, a sort of famous one that for my money would be the Best Picture winner, would be Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. This is a film that, of course, directed by Stanley Kubrick, so if I didn't want to cover it for an Oscar film, it's because Stanley Kubrick, one of the greatest directors of all time, if not the greatest, very well acclaimed in terms of all of his films, and this is arguably one of his best in such an acclaimed filmography. But it's also notable that this was nominated for 4 Oscars, but didn't win any of them, actually, because even though it's in black and white, didn't get into a lot of those art direction and cinematography, just got in for Peter Sellers' writing, directing, and Best Picture. Despite that, a critically acclaimed film, and a film that was really well recognized at that time, and if you haven't seen it, definitely do your service and check it out, because Stanley Kubrick, once again, one of the greatest directors of all time. Another nominee, Mary Poppins. Of course, I didn't want to do this one because this is a classic movie, a classic Disney movie. They've done so many different aspects of this. Of course, they did the original Mary Poppins, and then Saving Mr. Banks, which is about Walt Disney trying to get the rights to Mary Poppins. And then, of course, most recently, Mary Poppins Returns. And this is a film I deeply love. I was raised on that and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang of this era. These are sort of the musicals, including Sound of Music as well, that I really loved and really responded to. And I think it just has this, and actually even the Mary Poppins Returns sequel, have this sort of almost Paddington-esque real earnestness and earned sentimentality, as you would say. The songs are great. They still hold up, and Julie Andrews, an incredible sort of career-defining cinematic icon in the character of Mary Poppins. very, very iconic movie, and of course I didn't want to do it for Forgotten Oscar films. So in my way, sort of three really great sort of notable movies, and then really my options that I decided were either Beckett, which is the other nominee, or Zorba the Greek, which I eventually went with. And I didn't want to choose Beckett just because it's about King Henry II, played by Peter O'Toole, and in the Rachel episode I talked about Peter O'Toole playing King Henry II again in The Lion in Winter. So that was a movie I briefly touched upon. Plus, in the Anne of the Thousand Days episode, that's about King Henry VIII, so sort of a royal family conflict with sort of advisors and things like that. It's sort of a theme, of course, we see throughout the 60s, and that was just a film that I feel like we've already talked about in the Anne of the Thousand Days episodes, and also in the Rachel episode. So really, it ended up being with Zorba the Greek, this sort of Anthony Quinn vehicle in a lot of ways. A film that I hadn't really heard too much about, despite knowing Anthony Quinn and seeing him as sort of this sort of legendary British actor. He was someone that this film, despite him sort of being his iconic film, is most known for being an Anthony Quinn movie and not necessarily a great movie on its own. So it was interesting to see and tackle it. It's also notable, though, I forgot to talk about the last couple episodes, but this one makes more sense because it won Best Black and White Cinematography and Best Black and White Art Direction, because that was a thing during this time. And I think 2 years later they ended up getting rid of those categories, the separation between color and black and white, because before they would have a cinematography, best cinematography, or best color cinematography, or best black and white cinematography. They also did the same for best art direction. They also had quite a few different sort of musical categories based off adapted or largely original. So there's lots of different categories that the Oscars had during this time that have sort of been whittled away, and this is, I think, a great example this year, especially Zorba the Greek winning these two Oscars, that because Zorba the Greek was the only nominee in Best Cinematography Black and White and Best Art Direction Black and White, that I think the larger Academy just decided to vote for it because it was a Best Picture nominee instead of the actual craft of it. So, and because more and more films are starting to go towards color, they decided to get rid of this category. I think this is sort of a year where we can tell that maybe Zorba the Greek, while shot beautifully, maybe not as deserving and should be in competition with some of the other great, beautifully Technicolor movies like My Fair Lady or Mary Poppins. I mean, some really outstanding, colorful movies in a lot of sense. So, transitioning to my thoughts, like I said before, this is a film that has largely been perceived as an Anthony Quinn vehicle, and Anthony Quinn being a legendary British actor, this is in a lot of ways the role that a lot of people believe he was born to play, a role that's so seminal to understanding his career. And Anthony Quinn is a legendary British actor who's really well respected within actors. I would say he's sort of, with his class, someone like a Richard Burton, sort of these heavy drinking, smoking, rugged, sort of heavy set British actors at this time, who really tackled sometimes these elegiac, as you would say, Shakespearean almost, or British royalty sort of roles in Kings and Queens, but then also sort of doing more everyday man, whether it be something like Richard Burton in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, or Anthony Quinn here in Zorba the Greek, just sort of playing in every kind of day man, this sort of minor Greek, miner as like a coal miner. Actually, I'm not sure what exactly he's mining, but I'm assuming it's some sort of do with actual mines, not a miner. But the standout of this movie, I think, would say is Anthony Quinn, but I'm not exactly sure if it's necessarily the best performance of Quinn's career, just because it's so over the top. I mean, he's really overdone. Sometimes it's to a comical effect, and therefore it loses its in terms of the seriousness of the weighty scenes. It gets in the way of that. I also think that sometimes that this character is annoying and hard to relate to, and then Alan Bates' character is just so sort of bland and generic that it's hard to really latch onto and give an emotional investment, and that's where I was sort of lacking in this movie. There's some great music in this movie for sure. I didn't even realize some really iconic music that I didn't realize that this was from Zorba the Greek. I just thought of it as sort of a classical piece in a lot of ways that had already been around. So in a lot of ways, the thing that's sustained time is this piece of music that I didn't even know until I saw the film. But also, it's notable that there's some really great lines based off the book that's well acclaimed. Things like "My brain is not the right weight," or "A man needs a little madness." sometimes it's sort of philosophical about life, but also other times it's cliched and overdone at its worst. At its best, it's got some good moments, but at its worst, it's pretty cliched in a lot of ways, which sort of leaves me in a mixed bag that's sort of emotionally hard to resonate to. And I think that really centers around the central character of Anthony Quinn. Do you relate to him? Do you find him compelling? Do you want to follow him where he's next? Because he is charismatic, because he is unpredictable, because he has a little bit of madness to him, and because Alan Bates is just a straight edge character, you sort of side to more of that sort of interesting world. But for me, I just wasn't able to emotionally connect, and sort of found because I wasn't able to emotionally connect, some of the moments are supposed to be emotionally satisfying, I felt disconnected and found a little bit cliched. But I think that specifically, and not necessarily the cinematography, but the art direction and the production design, well deservedly of the Oscar win, because it very much feels like a great using on location sets, for example. Really felt like a Greek village in a lot of ways. However, I do think this film would have benefited if it were in color, just to make those the beautiful landscapes of Greece really just stand out even more. So why hasn't this been remembered? I think maybe in a lot of ways the quality is a little spotty. This is very much Anthony Quinn's career-defining performance, and I think a lot of people see this movie as that rather than just a great movie. I think of Lawrence of Arabia as just a great movie. No one's saying, oh, it's a great Peter O'Toole performance or it's a great Anthony Quinn performance. Yes, those are all true, but it's also just a great movie in general. I think in a lot of ways the Oscars maybe prioritize things like in 2004, Ray. Jamie Foxx is brilliant in Ray, but the film maybe a little bit spotty. Maybe similar with Bohemian Rhapsody and Rami Malek. That they love the performance so much of the sort of iconic person or this interesting character that they'll love the movie so much that they want to get all these other awards. And unfortunately, I don't think those films sort of sustain in the long term, because if you're a Jamie Foxx fan, you're going to go check out Ray. If you're an Anthony Quinn fan, you're going to check out Zorba the Greek. But I don't think the general movie-going audience is going to say, from 1964, you've got to check out Zorba the Greek. I think they're more inclined to do something like A Hard Day's Night, or something like My Fair Lady, which has a great, I think, Audrey Hepburn performance, but is also, in general, just a really fantastic movie. So that's where sort of the line draws, where overall you still have to have a great movie. So unfortunately, I think its legacy is still maybe Anthony Quinn's best performance, if not a little bit sort of overly characterized, but still maybe not the best movie overall. But that's why I do the series. That's why I like exploring these movies, to understand why they haven't been remembered, and also give you guys a little bit of Oscar history. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your favorite 1964 movie and what you'd like me to see next for the upcoming weeks. If you have some forgotten Oscar films that you look at the sort of IMDb Best Picture list and you go, oh wait, I've never heard of that. I'd like Connor to speak about that. Let me know in the comments down below. I love hearing them, and that's why I do these videos, to create a great film community. So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.